Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Morris, and the topic I've chosen is what influence does the media have over the public's understanding of juvenile delinquency? Let's begin. Media is classified as a means of communication, whether that be written, broadcast, or spoken. It often reaches a large audience. The methods through which media are spread include TV, advertisements, movies, newspapers, magazines, and the list goes on. There's absolutely no question that everywhere we look, media is in one way affecting our ideas and culture. This is especially true in hyper-capitalized economies such as those seen in America, with higher access to technology and the overall opinion of others at the press of a button. This ingrained relationship we have as a society with media shows us how media both reflects and creates our dynamic culture. The influence of media extends to our criminal justice system and affects the way we perceive the problems in our society. As such, it is important to recognize how different types of media can impact the public's understanding of crime, particularly with reference to juvenile delinquency. One of the most commonly debated questions regarding the public perception of crime is whether media portrayals of sensationalized acts of crime make people think that the crime is more of a problem than it is, potentially leading to mass hysteria. This concern helps form a fundamental basis for which to approach the risks of media. It also raises the question of how to balance the First Amendment to free speech and press with the legal and ethical implications of negatively impacting perceptions of youth crime rates. After all, if the public is more worried about juvenile delinquency because of media, they might also worry that it itself can influence more crime in adolescents. This shows us that the effect media plays over public perception on juvenile crime is extremely important, and because that in and of itself affects preventative measures to future crime, legislation, and even the economy, as certain industries require operating off of, making money off of these kinds of stories. Whether or not we realize it, perception is a key indicator when it comes to how we operate as a society. One way we can answer the question of how media affects perception of juvenile crime is by first breaking down media into distinct groups, fictional and non fictional. First, let's analyze fictional media, such as movies and scripted television shows. Popularized TV series such as Beyond Scared Straight may draw attention to the most troublesome juveniles who can be expected to provide entertainment value and stir controversy. This depiction of juvenile delinquency departs from the reality of the situation, only showing a careful selection of juveniles whose problems and background may vastly differ from the average young delinquent. This issue extends to many other types of entertainment media, as stories and content on less significant crimes such as petty theft, vandalism, and minor drug abuse are less likely to sell. In this way, we can see how in a fictional setting, the truth can be distorted to be more entertainment by focusing the lens on material that is more prone to drawing attention. However, despite the overwhelming potential for influence, recent studies by Hesperoni and Tukashinsky have shown that viewing television crime dramas has little correlation to total crime frequency estimates, with only slight correlation to violent crime estimates. They make this conclusion, noting that the process of the development regarding perceptions of crime is far too complex to draw a reasonable correlation, and rather incorporate a range of competing variables unrelated to media, especially fictional media. These studies have also shown that people are aware that the images that they see in entertainment media are fiction, and as such do not form opinions and feelings of crime about them in the real world. A great demonstrator of this might be that people watching a film could be expected to react drastically different to videos of real crime versus fake crime. We could expect gritty and raw footage from real soldiers being shot at, storming the beaches of Normandy, to elicit a much greater emotional response as opposed to its movie depiction in The Longest Day. Most viewers can easily tell the difference between reality and fiction. As a result, we process the information differently based on the intent of the given source rather than the content. Next, I'll analyze the impact of non-fictional media, such as newspapers and TV news reports. Non-fictional media such as these can affect the public's perception through the spread of information. Many people look to media outlets such as internet sites, television, and newspapers as their main source of learning about youth crime. According to American psychologist Christopher Ferguson, while accurate statistics may sometimes be included with reference to youth crime rates, they are often overshadowed by attention grabbing headlines that more often affect the way we think about the rate at which that particular crime is occurring. An example of this might be how news outlets are quicker to publish disturbing articles about the most recent school shooting, while not as thoroughly discussing actual youth crime statistics. Even when they are mentioned, they can be misleading. An example of this might be even a shift of 1 to 2 murders per year, while the overall slope of youth crime rate could be decreasing. An increase of 1 or 2 murders could account for as much as 30%. which could be used to suggest that youth crime violence is actually increasing when the overall trend suggests otherwise. This problem is then exacerbated by the fact that the media covers a variety of other topics as well, ranging from things such as the war in Ukraine to disasters such as Hurricane Ian. So, this surface level of reporting of current events in media can lead viewers to unconsciously conclude that these crimes are occurring at a higher rate. For this reason, non-fictional news media has the capacity and incentive to affect public perception by altering the image of delinquency regarding juveniles. However, according to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, murder and non-negligent homicides account for less than 1% of all crimes, while violent crimes only account for 12%. This raises the question of whether or not news media reflects the statistic or not, or if they focus more on the sensationalized crimes as discussed previously. Also, if there's any variance between the proportion and quality of crime observed in the community regarding juveniles, it would further bring the question of how that variance impacts perception of juvenile crime rates overall. By more closely examining this relationship, we can better understand the impact of news media and how crime is portrayed. First, I will draw a comparison from news media to fictional media in that they are both distributed with the intent to make money. Both fictional TV shows and Fox News alike rely desperately on ratings and viewership to sustain their programs. This means exactly what it implies that news media will report on what the viewers want to see, regardless of how well it represents the proportional truth of what's happening in society. A 2001 study from Dorfman and Schiraldi pinpointed four major characteristics regarding news media on juvenile crime, including that news coverage of crime is not actually covered in true crime rates, two, that coverage is episodic, focusing on isolated events, third, that news coverage connects race and crime, particularly in violent crime, and fourth, that youth are usually rarely included in the news, but when they are, it's usually connected to violence. Psychotherapist Jeffrey Kotler notes that much of this presentation of this information is influenced by our innate cultural appeal to violence. This is well evidenced throughout human history, as seen throughout history with our continuous viewing of violent sports. From modern day mixed martial arts and boxing to ancient Roman gladiator battles, it has been seen consistently that we are drawn to violence. In addition to the spin placed by the concentration of violence, this is further skewed by the fact that crime rates of both juveniles and adults have been recently in decline. Another important problem with news media coverages is that the headlines are very brief introspections in the context of the life of the crime. Many times the public will never hear how the investigation turns out. According to Ferguson, if the crime isn't solved within the first 48 hours, the odds of the outcome being brought to life diminish rapidly. This can be misleading because of the way it makes it seem as though a much larger percentage of cases are going unsolved. Exonerations of initial suspects may also ignore it, especially in longer cases when all of the information isn't distributed right away. This, of course, follows the exonerated individual even in cases where the real perpetrator has been convicted. This can, of course, change the perspective of the public to crucify innocent juvenile suspects who were never actually convicted and were even later acquitted. So, right, overall, based on these studies, we know that non-fictional news media coverage does not portray juvenile crime information accurately. But how does that impact public perception on the issue? Well, because news media has the intent to distribute accurate information, the way we process it is vastly different than how we process fictional media. We tend to be impacted much more directly when we hear more about these live events, which is usually accompanied by relevant documentation such as initial police reports, photos of the victims, and gruesome details. A study from the journal Broadcasting Electronic Media showed that significant media has shown a positive correlation to increased perceptions of juvenile crime and decreased perceptions of the effectiveness of the juvenile justice system. Keep in mind that these perceptions are reinforced regardless of decreased crime rates and potential reform to juvenile detention centers. Even if both of these factors are improving, the public will likely not interpret it that way. As viewers in the study watched more crime related media, they were increasingly likely to misperceive realities of criminal crime and justice. These perceptions are undoubtedly tied to the disproportionate coverage of violent crime cases, and especially in the context of juveniles who are reported on less and more common than not surrounding harder crimes.